Never imagined the happiest day of my life would become the beginning of my worst nightmare. 5 years ago, standing under that simple white arch in the backyard of our little house, I truly believed I'd found my forever. James looked at me with eyes full of promise, eyes that assured me no storm could ever reach us. Family and friends cheered, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed against the setting sun, painting a picture so perfect it almost felt unreal. But life has a peculiar way of showing you the truth hidden behind perfect pictures. Just a week after our honeymoon, Emily, James's older sister, came over for dinner. I had prepared everything meticulously, desperate to impress the woman who'd practically raised James. Yet, as soon as she stepped into our cozy dining room, I felt a sudden chill fill the air, sharp and unsettling. "Nice place," Emily said, her eyes flickering dismissively over the handmade decorations and candles I'd carefully arranged. "Cute, for now." James laughed awkwardly, squeezing my shoulder gently. "Don't mind Emily, she's always been particular." Particular wasn't the word I'd have chosen, but I smiled politely, swallowing my hurt. After all, family meant compromise, didn't it? Weeks turned into months, and Emily's visits became more frequent, each one leaving small invisible wounds. Her comments would start off as compliments and quickly twist into something darker. "I see you're cooking again, Anna," she remarked one evening, stirring the soup I'd spent hours perfecting. "You know, James always preferred my cooking, but it's sweet of you to try." I looked at James, waiting for him to intervene, to defend me, even just gently. But he just chuckled, shaking his head as if it were all harmless banter. "Emily's teasing, don't take it so seriously." So I smiled, nodded, and buried the pain deeper. Each quiet compromise felt like another stitch sealing a wound, hiding scars only I could feel. But scars, I've learned, don't stay hidden forever. One late afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, I was tidying up James's office when I noticed something strange. Bank statements scattered across his desk, withdrawals made regularly, each one substantial. My heart quickened as I traced my finger along the pages. Emily's name was unmistakably linked to each transaction. My mind raced. Why would Emily need so much money? Did James know? That night, waiting for James felt endless. The moment he walked in, I approached him cautiously, documents trembling in my hands. "James, I need to show you something," I began softly. As he scanned the papers, his expression changed dramatically, not to confusion, but to anger. "You went through my personal things?" His voice was cold, eyes blazing with accusation. "No, I was just— Why can't you ever leave things alone, Anna?" He slammed the papers onto the table, scattering them like leaves in the wind. "Emily is family. She wouldn't do anything without reason." The room spun around me, disbelief settling coldly in my chest. James, my rock, had chosen his sister's shadow over the truth right in front of him. The reality I'd tried so hard to deny suddenly stood clearly before me. I was an outsider in my own marriage. That night, lying awake beside James, his back turned to me in silent protest, I stared at the dark ceiling, tears silently slipping down my cheeks. It wasn't Emily's harsh words or James's coldness that hurt the most. It was realizing that the very foundation I'd built my happiness on was slowly cracking beneath my feet, and I wasn't sure how to stop it from falling apart. Over the next few months, our home slowly turned into a battlefield where I fought silently, alone. I felt like a stranger tiptoeing around the life I once believed was mine. Emily's subtle criticisms grew sharper, bolder, and each word chipped away another small piece of my confidence. Still, I convinced myself that patience was my best armor, and silence my safest shield. But silence, I soon realized, had a cost far greater than speaking up ever could. One evening, James had to attend a last-minute work trip. He kissed me goodbye hastily, promising he'd be home soon, leaving behind a quiet, empty house that felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. It wasn't long before the doorbell shattered the silence. Opening the door, my heart sank instantly. Emily stood there, her presence filling the doorway with an icy chill. "I thought you might feel lonely," she smiled sweetly, stepping inside without invitation. "We never really get to talk alone." As she wandered through our living room, inspecting everything with a subtle look of disdain, my nerves tightened. I followed her, hands gripping the edges of my sleeves, fighting the urge to demand why she was really there. She turned to me suddenly, eyes piercing. "You know, James deserves someone who truly understands him, someone who knows family comes first." I felt anger rising, hot and unstoppable. "Emily, I love James more than anything. Then why?" she interrupted sharply, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Are you trying to tear him away from the only family he has left? Her words hit me like a slap. I never tried. Didn't you? She countered coldly. Digging through his finances, accusing me of stealing? You're poisoning his mind. My heartbeat hammered painfully, frustration bubbling over. You took money from him, Emily. It's right there, black and white. She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and jarring. I was protecting him, protecting our family, something you'll never understand. Her tone made my blood run cold. I wanted to respond, but before I could form another word, she stepped closer, her eyes narrowing, her voice dripping venom. You're temporary, Anna, but I'm his sister. That bond you'll never break. Without waiting for my response, Emily turned sharply, leaving the house as abruptly as she'd entered. The door slammed shut behind her, echoing through the empty rooms, leaving me trembling, heart pounding, alone with her words still ringing in my ears. Later that night, as James unpacked from his trip, I hesitated in our bedroom doorway, watching him quietly. My heart urged me to speak up, to reveal what Emily had said. Gathering all my courage, I softly began. James, we need to talk. Emily came by and... His body tensed, his shoulders stiffening defensively before I even finished. Anna, please, can't we have one night without discussing my sister? But James, she said things that... He turned sharply, eyes exhausted, yet hardened. Anna, you're always finding faults with her. Can't you see she's just trying to protect us? My voice faltered, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. Protect us? James, can't you see what she's doing? He sighed heavily, his gaze distant, voice cold. Maybe Emily's right. Maybe you just don't understand what family means. As he turned away again, something inside me shattered quietly. Standing in the dim hallway, his words sunk in deep, painful, and true. The man I loved was slipping away from me, pulled further into a shadow I couldn't penetrate. That night, as darkness settled around our home, I sat by the window, staring blankly at the quiet street outside. The ache in my chest was overwhelming, an emptiness carved from months of quiet endurance. But beneath that pain, anger simmered quietly. Anger at Emily for her cruelty, anger at James for his blindness, and above all, anger at myself, for staying silent too long, for allowing myself to fade slowly into someone else's idea of who I should be. The time had come to choose, continue drowning quietly in silence or finally fight for my voice to be heard. Days turned into weeks, and the silent tension between James and me thickened like fog. I tried to push forward, putting on a brave face at family dinners and social events, pretending everything was normal. But the strain of pretending was beginning to wear me thin. Then came that evening, the one I could never erase from my memory. It had been raining all afternoon, a relentless downpour tapping steadily against the windows, filling our home with an unsettling rhythm. James had been delayed at work, again. I stood alone in the kitchen, absent-mindedly chopping vegetables, feeling every slice resonate sharply with my own hidden frustrations. A sudden knock shattered my concentration, causing the knife to slip, slicing lightly into my fingertip. I flinched, quickly washing my hand before heading hesitantly toward the door. I opened it to see Emily standing on our porch, drenched from the rain, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Emily, I asked cautiously, instinctively stepping back. She stepped inside without invitation, her shoes squeaking softly against the wooden floor. Her eyes were wild, her breath uneven. Did you enjoy it? She demanded abruptly, her voice trembling with rage. Enjoy what? I asked, confusion washing over me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled document, thrusting it aggressively toward me. The account is frozen. James confronted me. You've finally turned him against his own family. I stared at the paper in disbelief. James had acted on my discovery, without even telling me. My heart surged with hope, a fragile, fleeting relief, but Emily's angry glare immediately shattered it. I didn't do this, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Stop lying, she shouted, eyes burning into mine. All you've ever done is manipulate him. Emily, please, I tried to reason calmly, holding my palms up in defense. Let's talk when James comes home. But before I could finish, Emily lunged forward, grabbing the crystal vase from the hallway table. Time slowed dramatically as I watched it swing through the air, reflecting shards of light before striking me violently on the side of my head. Pain exploded instantly, sharp and blinding. My knees buckled beneath me, sending me sprawling onto the cold, hard floor. Warm blood trickled down my temple, staining the white carpet beneath me. Through blurred vision, I saw Emily standing over me, breathing heavily, horrified yet unrepentant. You think you can replace me? She hissed, voice shaking with rage. You'll always be the outsider. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, fear mixing painfully with betrayal. Just then, the door swung open again. James stood frozen in the doorway, raindrops dripping off his coat, eyes wide in disbelief. Emily, what have you done? He whispered, his voice trembling as he looked from his sister's enraged face down to me on the floor. James, I choked out weakly, desperately reaching a shaking hand toward him. Please. He hesitated, eyes filled with confusion and anguish, caught between the sister he idolized and the wife he had vowed to protect. The silence stretched unbearably between us, the only sound the faint dripping of water from his coat onto the wooden floor. Emily dropped the vase with a dull thud, glass cracking softly. James, she's destroying us, she pleaded, her voice shifting instantly to desperation, playing expertly on his uncertainty. James took a hesitant step toward her, eyes filled with conflict. Emily, I don't know, I can't. But his hesitation spoke volumes louder than his words ever could. Watching him struggle between loyalty to his sister and protecting me, something inside me fractured irreparably. In that heartbreaking moment, I understood clearly I was alone. James finally moved, not toward me, but towards his sister. Let's calm down, he whispered soothingly to Emily, gently guiding her toward the door. We'll sort this out. I lay there stunned, unable to speak or move, watching as my husband chose to comfort the woman who had just attacked me. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, I was left alone in the darkness, my body trembling violently from shock, tears streaming silently down my face. The pain from my head faded beneath a deeper, more searing pain inside my chest. That night, in the cold silence of what was once our home, I knew one undeniable truth. I had to find the strength to walk away. Because staying, I realized, would mean losing myself forever. In the days following that night, I drifted through life like a shadow, present but unseen, moving through familiar spaces that now felt unbearably foreign. Our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become unbearably silent, each empty room echoing with broken promises and lost dreams. James avoided me, barely meeting my gaze when our paths inevitably crossed. His silence was heavy, speaking louder than any words ever could. I watched helplessly as our marriage slipped quietly through my fingers like sand that no longer wished to be held. One morning, while sipping cold coffee in the empty kitchen, I finally felt something stir deep within me, a small, flickering determination. I knew I couldn't remain trapped in this cycle of silent suffering forever. But how could I possibly start over? That afternoon, I found myself standing nervously in front of Laura's door. She opened it quickly, concern clear in her warm eyes. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around me, pulling me close. The embrace broke the dam, holding back my emotions, and tears streamed down my face, releasing the weight of months of suppressed pain. Sitting across from Laura, hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of tea, I finally allowed myself to speak the truth out loud. I don't know who I am anymore, I whispered, my voice trembling. I spent so long trying to fit into James's world, to earn Emily's approval, I forgot who I was. Laura leaned forward, her eyes filled with gentle strength. You gave so much of yourself, Anna, maybe too much. It's okay to step back. It's okay to start putting yourself first. Her words landed softly, yet they resonated deep in my heart. It was the permission I hadn't known I needed, the quiet affirmation that it was acceptable, even necessary, to prioritize my own healing. Returning home, a newfound clarity filled me. Carefully, quietly, I began gathering my belongings, each item I packed becoming an act of reclaiming myself. My hands shook as I zipped the suitcase, my heart pounding in rhythm with the weight of the decision I was making. I glanced toward the dresser, where a framed photograph of our wedding day sat, capturing a happier, simpler moment. For a brief second, nostalgia tugged painfully at my heart. But then I remembered James's hesitation, his silence, his choice, and my resolve solidified. On the bedside table, I left a simple note. James, I love you deeply, but I have to learn to love myself more. As I stepped out of our house, suitcase in hand, the evening air felt crisp and new, as though the world outside had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. With every step toward my car, a sense of freedom grew within me, mingled with fear and uncertainty, yet undeniably powerful. Driving away, I watched our home fade in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were the quiet tears of relief, of strength, of courage. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely alive, moving forward into the unknown. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew this was my first true step toward healing and toward finding out who I really was. Stepping into Laura's small, warmly lit guest room felt like entering an entirely different world, one filled with gentle possibility rather than cold judgment. The soft glow from a bedside lamp illuminated the neatly made bed, fresh linens folded thoughtfully atop the covers. As I set down my suitcase, my heart fluttered with uncertainty, but beneath the fear, there was an unmistakable pulse of hope. "Take your time," Laura said softly from behind me, sensing my hesitation. "You're safe here. Let yourself rest." That night, sleep came slowly. Lying in the unfamiliar bed, I stared up at the ceiling, tracing imaginary patterns as my mind replayed every painful conversation, every hurtful silence I'd endured. But gradually, my breathing slowed, the rhythm steadying as exhaustion finally pulled me under. In the days that followed, Laura gave me the space I desperately needed, never pressing me to talk, yet always quietly present, her kindness gentle and unobtrusive. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, genuinely understood without needing to explain or justify myself. One morning, as golden sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, Laura placed a hot cup of coffee in front of me, then sat quietly across the small wooden table, watching me thoughtfully. "Anna," she began gently, choosing her words with care, "there's someone I think you should speak to, a therapist friend of mine. She's wonderful, and I truly believe she could help you find the clarity you're seeking." I hesitated, my fingers tightening nervously around the mug. Therapy had always seemed like something reserved for others, people who had experienced real trauma. But then again, wasn't that exactly what had happened to me? Meeting Laura's steady gaze, I finally nodded slowly, quietly accepting her offer. "Okay," I whispered, voice filled with uncertainty, yet touched by quiet courage. "I'll talk to her." Uh, a few days later, I found myself sitting anxiously in a cozy office downtown, the soft aroma of lavender and fresh tea hanging comfortingly in the air. Across from me sat Dr. Evelyn Hart, her smile warm and reassuring, eyes radiating a calm wisdom that immediately soothed my frayed nerves. "Tell me about yourself, Anna," she encouraged softly. "But more importantly, tell me about what you're feeling." At first, words tangled in my throat, hesitant and fragile. But as she listened patiently, I felt a door inside my heart gently opening, giving voice to emotions I'd buried deeply beneath years of silence. "I've spent my entire life trying to please everyone," I finally admitted, voice shaking with raw honesty. "I gave everything I had, and still, it wasn't enough." Dr. Hart leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "Anna, have you ever considered that perhaps the issue wasn't with you? Maybe you were trying to find validation from people who simply couldn't see your worth." Her words struck something deep within me, resonating powerfully. Tears filled my eyes, not tears of sadness this time, but tears of recognition, a profound realization flooding through me. All those years spent seeking approval had left me empty, disconnected from my own sense of self-worth. In the weeks that followed, each therapy session became another stepping stone on my journey of healing. Dr. Hart gently guided me through the process of reclaiming my identity, helping me learn how to establish boundaries I'd never dared to set before. One evening after therapy, as I stood alone in Laura's guest room, gazing into the mirror, I paused, really seeing myself for the first time in ages. My reflection stared back, no longer the tired, defeated woman I'd become accustomed to seeing, but someone different, someone brave, imperfect, yet authentic. I reached out, fingertips lightly touching the cool glass, acknowledging the woman staring back at me. "I see you," I whispered softly, feeling tears gently slip down my cheeks. "I finally see you." In that quiet moment, I understood that healing wasn't a destination, it was an ongoing journey, messy yet beautiful. For the first time, I believed in the possibility of finding joy again, of rebuilding a life not defined by anyone else's expectations, but one shaped entirely by my own truth. And that realization filled my heart with a quiet yet powerful strength I'd never imagined possible. Healing brought clarity, but clarity demanded action. As weeks turned into months, I began feeling a deep, quiet strength emerge inside me, urging me to confront the shadows I had left behind. Emily had hurt me, and James had let her, but neither of them had faced consequences. Yet. One rainy evening, Laura and I sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by boxes of old documents, emails, and scattered receipts. A single lamp cast a warm glow across our makeshift workspace as we pieced together fragments of evidence like detectives on the edge of a breakthrough. "Look at this," Laura said suddenly, her voice sharp with excitement as she handed me a faded letter she'd found tucked inside one of the boxes. I unfolded it carefully, my heart quickening as I scanned the words. It was an official letter from years earlier, detailing suspicions that Emily had been involved in questionable financial dealings shortly after James had inherited the family assets. The letter indicated a quiet investigation had begun, but without sufficient evidence, it had been abandoned. My pulse pounded. All along, Emily's manipulation ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. "We have to dig deeper," Laura whispered determinedly, her eyes blazing with conviction. "If she's done this before, she's probably left a trail." And together we delved further, contacting former acquaintances, requesting archived records from the local courthouse, and slowly gathering evidence of Emily's manipulations. With every piece we uncovered, I felt an overwhelming sense of vindication and a deep sadness. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. A chance to reclaim the dignity Emily had tried so viciously to strip away. Finally, after weeks of painstaking research, we sat at Laura's kitchen table late one night, staring at the compelling evidence spread before us. Documents clearly indicated multiple financial frauds and manipulations orchestrated by Emily over several years, not just against James, but others too. Each piece of paper was a damning proof of her deceit. "This is enough," Laura said quietly, her voice firm with conviction. "You can take this to the authorities. She can't hurt anyone else if she's held accountable." I nodded slowly, my hands trembling as I gathered the papers carefully into a neat folder, each sheet representing a broken silence, a truth brought bravely into the light. 2 days later, I sat nervously across from Detective Martinez at the local precinct. She studied the evidence carefully, her sharp eyes flicking through documents, brows knitted with seriousness. My heart pounded as silence filled the small room, broken only by the soft rustle of papers. Finally, she looked up, her gaze steady and resolute. "Anna, this is substantial evidence. We'll need your full cooperation, but with this we can build a strong case." Relief washed over me like cool rain on a hot day. Tears threatened my eyes again, not from pain, but from gratitude, validation, and finally, justice. As I stepped out of the precinct, the evening sky felt wider, clearer somehow, even beneath thick clouds heavy with rain. I felt lighter too, as if the weight of years of silent suffering had finally lifted from my shoulders. That evening, my phone vibrated, breaking my quiet reflection. My breath caught sharply when I saw James's name flash across the screen. Hesitating briefly, I answered. "Anna?" His voice was heavy, strained with regret. "James," I replied softly, my heart steady for the first time. "It's done. Emily will finally face what she's done." There was a long silence, heavy with unspoken emotion. Then James whispered hoarsely, "I'm sorry, Anna, for everything." I listened carefully to the sincerity in his voice, feeling a strange calm rather than anger or resentment. "I know you are," I replied gently, my voice unwavering. "But this isn't about apologies anymore. It's about responsibility. It's about truth." Another pause filled the space between us. "I understand," James finally whispered, a quiet acceptance evident in his tone. When I ended the call, peace settled gently around me, reassuring in its quiet strength. I had faced the shadows of my past, bringing painful truths courageously into the open. Emily's reign of manipulation was over. Yet as I stood beneath the soft evening rain, I understood something more profound. True healing wasn't merely about confronting those who hurt you. It was about reclaiming your voice, your dignity, your life. And that, finally, was exactly what I had done. Several months had passed since Emily faced justice, yet I found myself caught off guard by a simple encounter on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I had just stepped into my favorite small cafe, the familiar aroma of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries instantly soothing my senses. Outside, sunlight streamed gently through the windows, casting warm patterns across the worn wooden tables. As I moved toward the counter, I felt a sudden familiar gaze settle on me, gentle, hesitant, yet unmistakably his. My heart quickened as I slowly turned, locking eyes with James, who sat alone at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a half-empty coffee cup. His expression was weary, eyes shadowed with deep regret. Anna, he called softly, his voice cautious, almost pleading. Please, can we talk? For a moment, old fears surfaced, threatening to pull me back into past patterns of hurt. But this time, instead of turning away, I steadied myself, took a deep breath, and slowly approached his table, choosing to face this final challenge directly. Sitting across from him, I noticed how worn James appeared, his usually confident posture now hunched, his face lined by stress. He looked down briefly before speaking, his voice shaking slightly. I wanted to reach out sooner, but I didn't know how, he admitted softly. What happened? What Emily did? I can't forgive myself for not believing you sooner. His remorse felt genuine, yet it hung between us, heavy and unresolved. My heart ached with memories of the love we once shared, yet a quiet strength inside reminded me not to lose sight of the progress I'd made. James, I replied gently, meeting his eyes with unwavering calmness. I needed you to believe me then, not now. What hurt the most wasn't Emily's cruelty, it was your silence. He nodded slowly, eyes filled with a sadness I recognized from my own reflection during darker days. I know, he whispered. I was blind, Anna. Emily manipulated us both, but I allowed it. I let my fear and loyalty cloud my judgment. I've lost everything and I deserve it. Watching his vulnerability unfold before me, I expected to feel anger or resentment, but instead, I felt a deep compassion for the man I had once loved. The man who now understood, perhaps too late, the consequences of his choices. James, I don't hold on to anger anymore, I said softly, my voice steady, yet kind. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean returning to something that hurt us both. I've learned that love, without respect and trust, can never truly survive. He listened carefully, visibly absorbing each word, silent tears forming in his eyes. Is there no chance at all, Anna? No way for us to rebuild? I paused, allowing my heart to answer honestly rather than from nostalgia or guilt. I care deeply for you, James. I always will. But sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. We've both changed and we've both grown. Maybe the best way to honor what we once had is to respect that growth, even if it means we're apart. A heavy silence fell between us, punctuated only by the soft clinking of cups and quiet murmurs from other tables. Finally, James took a deep, resigned breath. You're stronger than I've ever known, he whispered, respect and sorrow intertwined in his voice. If I had realized sooner, maybe things would have been different. Maybe, I agreed softly, but we can't live in maybes, James. We have to live in the reality we've created. He nodded again, understanding settling visibly across his features. As we rose to leave, he reached out gently, placing a cautious hand on mine, a gesture not of possession, but of quiet gratitude. I'm sorry, he said once more, quietly and sincerely. Truly sorry. I know, I replied softly, gently squeezing his hand before letting it go. But now, it's time we both heal. As we walked away from each other, out into the gentle sunlight, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and closure. This conversation, though painful, had freed us both from lingering ghosts of our past. Stepping onto the bustling sidewalk, I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of years lifted from my shoulders. I had faced my past without bitterness or fear, finally understanding that true strength wasn't measured by never falling, but by how gracefully one stands again after the fall. In that moment, for the first time in a very long while, my future felt boundless, open and truly mine. In the months following my conversation with James, my life gradually began to blossom again. Each day brought small, quiet moments of renewal. Morning walks under golden dawns, afternoons spent helping others find their strength, and evenings of quiet reflection filled with gratitude rather than sorrow. I took on a position as a counselor at a local women's support center, guiding those who, like me, had once believed their worth depended on someone else's validation. Every woman I spoke with taught me something new about resilience and courage, reinforcing the quiet voice within me that had emerged through my journey. One sunny afternoon, as I organized files at the center, I came across an old journal tucked away beneath stacks of paperwork. Curiosity drew me to open its weathered pages. Inside, dozens of handwritten stories poured out. Stories from women who had walked similar paths, their voices raw yet fiercely hopeful. I gently ran my fingers across their words, feeling an undeniable sense of belonging, of purpose. In their stories, I recognized echoes of my own: fear transformed into courage, pain into wisdom, loss into liberation. That evening, sitting alone in Laura's backyard, I held the journal close, its stories now mingling gently with mine. Warm sunlight danced through the leaves above, casting soft shadows that played across the grass. Laura joined me quietly, handing me a cup of tea before settling comfortably beside me. "You seem different these days," she remarked softly, eyes twinkling with gentle pride. I smiled warmly, realizing how right she was. "I finally feel like myself again," I admitted gently, my voice steady and confident. "Not the version someone else wanted me to be, but who I truly am." Laura nodded thoughtfully, sipping her tea. "Anna, have you ever thought about sharing your own story? It might help others feel less alone." I paused, contemplating her suggestion. The idea frightened me slightly, yet beneath that fear stirred an excitement, an undeniable desire to transform my experience into something meaningful. "Maybe you're right," I finally whispered, smiling softly. "Maybe it's time." As weeks turned into months, my evenings became filled with writing, pages gradually filling with honest reflections and quiet revelations. With each word, I reclaimed another piece of myself, steadily piecing together a narrative built not on suffering, but strength and empowerment. Finally, the day came when I held my own finished manuscript in my hands, a book bearing my story, my truth. I stared down at its cover, my heart swelling with quiet pride and joy. A gentle knock at my door drew me back to reality. Opening it, I found Laura standing there, beaming proudly, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "Congratulations," she whispered warmly, hugging me tightly. "You've created something beautiful, Anna, and you've given a voice to so many." My heart filled with emotion as we stood there, flowers pressed between us, the sun setting softly behind the trees outside, painting the sky with shades of amber and pink. That evening, after Laura had left, I walked alone along the quiet street, my book held close. As twilight settled gently around me, I felt an overwhelming peace envelop me, a peace born from the courage to let go of the past, the strength to heal, and the wisdom to embrace my own worth. Pausing beneath the gentle glow of a street lamp, I took a deep breath, feeling fully alive, fully myself. Gazing upward into the vast, star-filled sky, I whispered softly into the night, "I am enough." In that simple declaration lay the profound truth I'd discovered on this journey: that life's deepest healing comes not from erasing the past, but from facing it bravely, learning from it deeply, and moving forward with authenticity and compassion. My future was no longer defined by the pain of yesterday. Instead, it stretched ahead, open and beautiful, filled with endless possibilities, a life reclaimed, fully and fearlessly my own.